Then, as soon as it began, it was over. Twilight let out a breath, as she'd been holding in her shoulder shot through several throbs of pain in her mind, before slowly fading back to a dull throb. It had been an agonizing procedure, but she could now feel her leg resting comfortably against her body. She had been able to walk more comfortably now, for the maneuvering on her free legs would be difficult. But once he had finished with the sling, and made sure it was comfortable on her body, he turned back towards his bag and made sure everything was organized. Twilight watched him quietly, before he closed the bag and placed on his back. "Alright, when I found you, I also found some few things lying around your body. I left them in the drawer," he said, pointing to where he had pulled the health drink from. The unicorn looked to where Lance was pointing, making her way over to it. She then lit the drawer up with her magic, pulling it open and scanning the contents inside. The first thing her eyes fell upon was her broken, rusty sword. She levitated it up and looking at it. Much of sharpened, pointed end of it had broken off, but not surprisingly considering the battle it had just survived. The edges were dulled as ever, and the weapon slowly became more and more of an edge-bulging device, rather than a sword or even a dagger. The steel was stained with dried blood, and no doubt a battle as well. He let out a soft sigh and closed his eyes, feeling around her magic revisor and lifting up a space with it. The sword disappeared into the hole, holding it onto it for her until she needed it again. The next thing she noticed there were several notes and papers that she had been gathering since she left the library. She levitated them back up in the air and inspected them, seeing if anything had changed. Many now bore smeared blood marks, near indication that they landed on the ground after she passed out. She was still able to read the text on most of them, and even found the note that had distorted scribbles on it. She had used to wipe the blood from her face, and the only note stood out in front of them was the one that Spike had found within the library. She read the words again to herself. A chill ran down her spine. "When all is lost, the darkness is the strongest, and when it's all cold and bleak, you'll find the light." The note unsettled her. She had been only seen the darkness and things around in the cold bleak. They really nearly got worse than this. She had lost her friends, her mentor, Rarity was severely injured somewhere, and she almost lost her leg completely. How she could find the light in the world like this? She shook her head, trying to get the negative thoughts out of her mind. She had to stay focused. If things were going to get worse, she would have to remain strong and then look out for herself and keep her head held high. In the most place she had seen the revisor as well, compelled to hold on to them. They didn't take up as much space as most of the other items did, so she could comfortably hold on to them for the time being, though she was going to be more careful about how much magic she expanded from now on. The next she saw Canterlot Archive's pendant. The rune she had shown still clipped onto the string. The purple aurora surrounded the pendant, and she checked the crystal end of it. The light turning on the drawer as she still had a way to illuminate the dark areas without having to cast her light spell. She silently thanked Celestia that she still had that as well before placing it around her neck. The last thing at the bottom of the drawer was the last thing she expected to see. There were 3 books, 2 covers that she had recognized, and one was now blank. She levitated 3 of the books up, reading the covers that she recognized. The Old Widow, Heaven's Finn's Food, and that meant the blank book had to be one with the cat who married a mouse. How did these get here? The unicorn murmured so quietly to herself, examining the tomes. "I left these behind." She then opened up the blank book, flipping through the several pages. It was completely empty now, not even the trace of once it contained the text. She closed her eyes and then started at it. She knew it had originally and still remembered the basis of the story. She placed the empty book back down in the drawer. If it was empty, she didn't even bring it with her. However, she made it a hole in her magic for her 2 other books, and they were soon found herself in their revisor as well. "Are you ready?" Lance asked, that usual gruff stuff manner. Twilight wasn't sure what to make of it, but for the time being she shrugged it off. "Yeah," she answered quietly, turning around to face the stallion. "Do we know where we're going, huh? I mean, I'd like to go back to where you found me. see if I can find any trace of rarity. Well, I found you in the lobby and we'll pass through on our way out, Lance explained quickly. And as for where, I am not sure. As far as I could tell, the wandering leads to our answers. Staying in one place for too long is a bad idea. Another wave of various emotions seemed to run across Lance's face, although he was considering something very seriously. Twilight then blinked in confusion, before a look of determination hit Lance as he stepped closer to her. Twilight, I need you to understand something. Well, but what is it? She asked hesitantly. There was something about the edge of his voice that was unsettling her. Before we head out, I need you to be absolutely sure. If I wasn't there, would you continue on by yourself? He then seemed to have a glare, though the glare seemed unnecessary for this context of words. I'd have no choice, right? Twilight hesitated for herself for a moment to answer. I could walk just fine. I admit it's a little awkward on free hooves, but you've helped me a lot. Good, he closed his eyes to the grunt. Because it's more than likely we're going to be separated, and I'm not going to be able to take care of you when we are. So I needed you to make sure you're able to take care of yourself. Huh? Why would we be separated? Twilight's flattened ears and his words. We found each other, so let's stick together, be able to survive better. It's not that simple, Lance barked, glaring at Twilight, causing her to nearly jump out of her skin. This world around us in this place, it isn't Ponyville, or even Equestria. This world has its own being, and a mind of its own, and it doesn't like ponies being together. It drew closer to Twilight, the unicorn finding herself back up into the drawers. It separates us, divides us, and makes us fools for our own amusement. You can't trust anyone here, Twilight. I brought you in from the library, healed your wounds, and waited for you to recover. But it's very possible you're not really Twilight, but the rather world's sick imagining of her. Twilight was afraid. She fell to her haunches, just staring at the Pegasus before her who was bearing down on her, unable to move or disobey him. And the same goes for you. You can't believe I'm Lance, or I helped you with good intentions. This world is cutthroat and won't hesitate to mess with your heart and spit in your face. Just as when you think you figured it out, it'll smack you and make you start all over again. You understand? That's the kind of world we found ourselves in, and it does have any right to be messing with our heads? Lance growled as he gritted his teeth. His nose was pressing against Twilight's as his eyes bored to hers. What right does this world have to give to those ponies, who think that they can mess with the dead and make a mockery of them? Who thinks they can disrespect my posy? He yelled, finally closing his eyes and gritting his teeth. The spell Twilight had been under broke for that moment, and she could finally breathe, the perspiration rolling around her neck as she gulped down a lump that had formed in her throat. Lance, Twilight began to speak, trying to get the stallion to stop yelling at her for things she couldn't control. Lance's eyes shot open in realization of what he had just done. He took a few steps forward, away from Twilight, cursing at himself under his breath several times. Twilight then put her good hoof to her chest, trying to calm her racing heart. She couldn't explain what just happened to her. Lance had just simply looked at her in the eye, and suddenly she had found herself deadlocked in fear, unable to control anything. Forgive me, Twilight, Lance continued to curse himself. This world is playing with my mind. He cut to himself, as if refusing to say any more. He then took a deep breath and turned to face her. His eyes much calmer now, his face though still around the edges, proving a calming look. I'll stay with you as long as I can. As long as this world permits me. My world is still hold true enough. You can't trust me and I can't trust you. He let out a long sigh as he closed his eyes. But I can't just leave my patient once I've started threatening them. It took several more seconds for Twilight to try and stand. She mentally willed her legs to stop shaking. Once they did, she was able to stand properly again. She swallowed once more, trying to calm herself. It wasn't that Lance was mad at her. She understood that. She could see past his anger. It wasn't directed at her, but at the world. She had been unfortunate to be in this way when it had came to the head. It's okay, Lance. She spoke once more, trying to convince herself that it was more than before the stallion before her. You're mad at the world, not me. We need to look out for each other. Even if you say it's true. The unicorn gulped, really hoping it wasn't true. Lance simply nodded, not wanting to risk opening another can of worms on the unicorn. He simply just walked over to the door, placed his hoof on it, before stopping a moment. He turned to look at the injured mare. "You ready?" He had to make sure he was before he opened the door. "Yeah, I'm ready." Twilight nodded her head slowly, falling behind the lead of the stallion. Twilight nodded his head in confirmation, swung open the door. He stepped out into the hallway beyond the room, and the unicorn followed carefully behind him. The stale air hit her nose first, just as she began to examine the hallway. The hallway was decaying just as Twilight figured it would be. The walls were stained with what appeared to be water and mold parts of the ceiling that were hanging loose, as if torn apart by something. The carpet beneath her hooves was dry and hardened for most of the Bristol state. Each step let out a quiet crunch on the ruined carpet. This isn't where the room was before." Lance glared at the hallway. "I brought you to a room near the lobby. This is a new hallway." "It's playing tricks on our minds?" Twilight then gulped down on her words. "I'm certain of it. Let's try and find a way back into the lobby. Try to stay close to me," Lance said, looking around before heading down the hallway, in the direction of what looked like it might lead somewhere. Twilight followed after him, taking a look at the doors that lined the hallway. Most of them were boarded up with wood, broken or paved over with cement. Twilight couldn't understand the meaning of it behind it. What purpose did it have boarding up the doors serve? There was a silence between them as they walked, a silent understanding between them that they needed to stay on their wits about them. The world wasn't going to spare them any mercy, something they both seemed to have learned from experience. They just seemed to listen to the crunching of the carpet under their hooves. As they were closer to the end of the hallway, a noise began to play that caught both of the ears. Twilight looked down in her room, hearing the buzzing emanating from the device, and then a loud thud could be heard from overhead, which caught their attention next. "Get back!" Lance shouted, turning around and fast as his body could manage. A loud crash echoing through the hallway as the ceiling in front of them caved in. Dust and debris flew around them as the wind rushed down and pushed them on the hull. Two ponies found themselves being pushed back, coughing as the dust attacked their mouths. The both of them just looked in the direction of the fallen ceiling, seeing what could have caused the collapse. There was an orb, as if though it was made of the shadows, in pulsing middle of the debris. The air around it was distorted, warping every word from around it. From the middle of a head began to form, pulling away from the shadows, a black-skinned pony with a long snout. It opened its eyes, containing nothing but the whites of its eyes. It opened to try to open its mouth, but its lips were sewn shut, just laying out a guttural growl of pain and anger. The two hooves appeared from the oozing darkness, shackled to the chains as the darkness itself. The creature let out a howl that echoed throughout the hallway, almost as if shifting the air with its voice alone. Lance was instantly on his heels, pushing against Twilight, who had fallen into a stunned daze of staring into the creature. "Move!" he yelled, snapping her back to her senses. She then turned on her hooves and began to run, tripping at her awkward correlation, finding herself planted against the ground. The creature let out a loud wail once more, Lance putting his hooves down on Twilight to try and get her back to her legs. Wood loudly cracked and began to splinter, the ponies looking back at the creature as a large black ribbon suddenly wrapped up and appeared in the center of the black mass, breaking straight for the walls into the hallway. Twilight scrambled to her legs though, as Lance tried to push her against as they moved. Lance cried out in sharp pain, jamming the ground as the ribbon came crashing through onto his back. Twilight gasped in shock. Her brain tried to process everything that had been thrown at her. The black ribbon slowly began to wrap around Lance, his eyes widening as he realized what was happening. "Lance!" Twilight cried out, grabbing a hold of his hooves as the ribbon suddenly became taut, pulling back straight towards the creature. Lance let out a horrifying cry of pain, coughing as he felt his body being yanked in two directions. Twilight's hooves scraped across the floor as she tugged, trying to free the Pegasus from the monster's grasp. A cry echoed through the hallway once again, overbearing the buzzing of the medallion. The unicorn was being dragged. The carpet was not giving her much room to grip. With only one hoof grabbing the lance, she didn't have much strength to bear. She had to go with what she had. Her horn lit up in the purple aurora surrounding Lance. She pulled everything she could muster, both physical and magical, trying to free Lance from the grip. A loud growl came from the monster, unhappy of this development. From the darkness that had made up its body, a second ribbon burst out, racing across the hallway. Twilight's eyes opened in horror as she saw it coming. Unable to move out of the way in time, the ribbon crashed onto her body, her hoof letting go of Lance. Her whole body was carried and sailing clean for the air. The black ribbon pressed down on her, sending her hurtling straight towards the side of the hallway. Yet a loud crack issued through the hallway as she was slammed straight to the floor. Twilight struck the room's floor and tumbled, coughing loudly as her body screamed out in pain. She grimacing, opening her eyes to look at the door that she had been thrown against. "Twilight!" The horrifying yell of the Pegasus came. She tried to get to her hooves, but only to have the black ribbon entering the room and coming for her. She grit her teeth, quickly summoning the blunt dagger from her revisor. She didn't have much time for the aim, just sent the dagger sailing through the air as hard as she could to throw it. The metal struck the ribbon, piercing right through and lodging itself in the ribbon. Blood splattered against the wall from where the dagger had impaled the cloth. The ribbon seemed to have shrieked in pain as the intrusion of the metal onto it. It flailed across the room in rapid movements, as though no longer sure of what to do. It came rushing back, slamming against the door it had slammed into. It gripped against the edges of the wooden door before pulling back into the hallway, slamming the door shut with it. The medallion instantly grew quiet, and the world grew quiet. Twilight was breathing heavily, staring at the door, unable to believe what just happened. She struggled to stand, her shoulders crying out in agony at the abuse that she was sustaining. She forced herself to push it aside. She managed to try and stand, and her legs shaking underneath her body as she lit her horn with magic and gripped onto the handle of the door, trying to force it open. She had to get back out and help Lance. The door didn't budge, refusing to open, as if it was jammed. Twilight then grunted in displeasure, hopping over to the door and pressing her hoof against the handle. She tried to force the door open, but the only thing she got her efforts was insistent clicking noise, telling her that it was jammed. "Lance!" Twilight yelled loudly as she could, resting her chest against the door before banging loudly against her with her good hoof. Silence only returned to her knocks. She couldn't hear anything out there anymore. No breaking of wood, no stallion screaming in pain, not even the echoing growl of the creature. She smashed her head against the door, letting out a pained cry. She was just with Lance. She just could have been done more to save her. But there was the moment the creature showed up. She just froze in place. She couldn't believe she'd done that. Lance couldn't stand a chance against the monster on his own, and it felt like her fault for having frozen up. Was it because she was injured? She was scared and wasn't able to go to protect herself? Not that she could anymore. She just lost her weapon again. "I'm sorry, Lance," the mare muttered under her breath, hoping that the stallion would be all right. She had no way of guaranteeing his well-being, but it was just like he had told her. She assumed that if he was dead, then there'd be no way she could help him at all. She thought of herself kicking, as if she had to figure out what to do next. She had to keep her mind calm and realize that if she did nothing but panic, she'd get nowhere and fast. Twilight took several deep breaths with her forehead pressed against the door, trying to calm herself and her racing heartbeat. Once she felt significantly calmed, she then stood over free hooves and turned around to examine the room she had found herself locked in. The mare gasped, clasping her good hoof over her mouth as her eyes fell upon the body of a white unicorn with a fiery red hair that had been nailed to the wall. Her forelegs had been spread wide and her back legs were pinned below her. She was in the same pose as the winter had been, with her blood seeping down the wall and onto her desk. Right below the body had a picture frame sitting on top of it. "Moon Dancer!" Twilight cried in shock. She sprung to her hooves and ran to the body of her old friend, staring in horror at all the thousands of wounds on her body. She was covered in lacerations, just as Winter had been. Her blood was still fresh and wet, dripping down on the wall. "Moon Dancer, please, tell me you're okay," Twilight cried out. Her magic lit up to try to get the nails that were embedded into Moon Dancer's legs. Her magic refused to catch onto the nails, as if something was repelling his magic. To Twilight, the lavender unicorn froze as she heard her voice, snapping her head back to look straight into Moon Dancer's face. The white unicorn was looking down at her, the fire-red hair covering one of its eyes, the other one staring soullessly back at the mirror before her. "The picture," Moon Dancer spoke in quiet, harsh voice, yet Twilight was only able to barely catch. "The picture?" Twilight then looked down at the desk Moon Dancer hung just above. On the edge of the desk was able to touch the blood. A small square of picture frame stood there, showing a half-burned picture of Twilight as a filly. Twilight blinked in confusion, raising her hoof to touch the strange picture. Suddenly, a light burst forward at the picture, causing the lavender unicorn to yelp and cover her eyes with her hoof. The sound of reels and rolling hit her ears as she could suddenly hear the shuffling of her hooves. She moved her hoof away from her eyes to see that picture was now projecting a light. A film was being played on the wall on the opposite of Moon Dancer. The rest of the room had grown dark, only illuminated by the light of the projection. The unicorn stared in with disbelief as the gray and torn static images rolled across the screen. Displayed inside of the images was a younger Twilight, staring out of the window of Canterlot. The hoof steps of her mentor slowly approached her behind. "What's the matter, Twilight?" a tall white unicorn asked, stepping out to a filly, the voice coming out as distorted part of the movie. "Oh, it's nothing, Princess. I'm sorry if I trolled you," young filly said, her voice cutting in and out as she stood up to return her work. "Are you sure? I've seen you look like this down before." Celestia looked concerned, walking over to her pupil. You could tell me anything, Twilight, I promise." The little filly hesitated, turning the page over to the book before looking up at Princess, unsure if she'd get in trouble. "I guess I'd kinda look silly, ner." The filly Twilight spoke up quietly. The film distorted her voice, shaking as the scene was shown before. "Why don't you ask one of your classmates? I'm pretty sure they'd love to study with you." Celestia smiled comfortably at her. "Oh no, I don't. They'll yell at me to study. I'll just do it alone." I'm sure I'll just get in their way." Twilight fumbled with her words, looking up pleadingly at Princess Celestia, though about her words for a moment, upon realizing before something. "I know just the partner for you." Celestia smiled happily, turning her head, calling out, "Spike! Spike, could you come here real quick?" The filly opened her mouth to speak, but before anything could come out, a film began to skip. Before breaking apart of the movie playing, the light faded, and the light of the room returned to it. Moon Dancer did that? Twilight then looked up at the mirror hanging from the wall before letting out another gasp. The mirror hanging from the wall was no longer Moon Dancer. This new mirror had a violet mane with magenta coat, lacerating the same way Moon Dancer had been. It just took Twilight a moment to realize who that mare was, before she covered her mouth in horror. "Sparkler!" she murmured quietly. She didn't even know what happened to Moon Dancer, but Lance's words then came to her mind. The town was just playing tricks on her mind again. Moon Dancer had never been there, but now Sparkler was. Please be another illusion." Twilight then begged in the silent air around her. Her horn lit up as she cast her magic, hoping her magic would once again be repelled by the nails, that she could prove that Sparkler wasn't actually dead. Her magic caught the nails and pulled them out. She gently levitated Sparkler's body to the ground in front of her, trying to hold back the tears at the edge of its eyes as she placed her ear to Sparkler's chest. She sat there trying to listen for the faintest trace of a heartbeat, something to tell her that she could possibly save Sparkler. One never came. Twilight gritted her teeth, not wanting to believe that this was true, but this was exactly the same thing that had happened to Winter. It couldn't have been a coincidence that she had thrust into this room. It couldn't have been a coincidence that she found Sparkler like this. The world was just trying to give her a message. A message her crucifixion carried, a warning that if you stepped out of the line, You offended the wrong pony, that if you did something objectionable, it was punishable by death. The world and its twisted eyes, its mind, games, monsters, and rules was telling you that she had to obey or be killed. Sparkler, Derpy, I'm sorry, she whispered to herself, feeling that the heat of her tears were rolling down her face once more. She knew about Sparkler. Derpy had adopted her almost a year ago, and even though they've been through a tough time adjusting to her life, Twilight had watched them had fights, reconcile over their family over time, enjoying each other's company, laughing and playing. Every pony knew that they were having the earliest of times. Derpy was a single mother with a job that just paid monetarily and was just paying for 2 kids. But she was that type of mare, the type who would do anything for her foals, who couldn't wake up in the morning without seeing the bright smiles of her 2 beautiful daughters. And laying there before Twilight was one of them, no longer able to smile, no longer able to laugh or play with their mother or sister. All she could be displayed was a message to Twilight. You were right, Lance, Twilight whispered quietly, for her face managed to calm herself. This place messes with your mind, disrespects the ponies that have lived here. She then looked down at Sparkler. Before she knew she had to do something for Sparkler, some memorial, some grave for her to be remembered. But to do it right, she would have to make her way out of the hotel. She had to make sure that Lance was okay too, as well. She had to go back out in Ponyville and help find her friends and Princess Celestia. Twilight steeled over her nerves once more, standing up and looking down at Sparkler's body. Sparkler, I promise, I'll be right back for you. I'll give you the burial you deserve. I'll let your mom know what happened to you. Twilight ran her hoof across her face one last time, sniffling as she managed to stand up. She approached the door and raised her hoof to press against the handle. This time it clicked open, creaking slightly as she opened in the world outside the door. Beyond the door appeared to be the hotel lobby. The Lavender Mare could have been surprised if it hadn't been expected to change location by now. The lobby was just depicted as the rest of the hotel. The carpet had been a dull brown, the receptionist's desk rotted and broken, long since disguised. There was even several doors lining the lobby, as she could clearly see. 2 hallways extended further into more rooms, but she couldn't see down them just yet. In the middle of the floor, Twilight could spot a rather sizable dried bloodstain, likely the spot where Lance had found her. The unicorn quickly walked over to the bloodstain in the middle of the carpet, inspecting it carefully. Just as Lance had said it, there was only 1 spot of noticeable blood, meaning that it was likely that she had been the only one there. Rarity's body, or even her blood, was nowhere to be found. I'm going to have to take it as a good sign, Twilight muttered to herself, looking around the lobby again. She was right there with me when I passed out. If her blood's not there, then maybe she's somewhere else, and safe. She has to be. She had said to herself, not to convince herself, but reinforce her will. She quickly then looked around for any sign she could find, a clue to where Rarity went, a sign of what became the strange alicorn she had fought, of any indication that this could have been the same place as she had been passed out in. Her search turned out empty, though. She let out a reluctant sigh before she moved on quickly to one of the hallways. She figured Lance had to be the one of those corridors. It only made sense. Coming around the bend of the hallway, she was then stopped at the sight of the massive pile of debris that blocked her half off the hallway. No doubt the same reason why the strange creature had crashed and attacked the mat. Her medallion wasn't buzzing, and she could hear a single sound coming from the other side. "Lance!" Twilight called out, trying to shot open the debris to get a closer look of what became of the scene. "Lance, are you there? Answer me, if you can hear me!" She yelled out loudly, not caring if she attracted the monster back out of hiding. She needed to know if the Pegasus was all right or not. She waited for a moment or two, waiting for him to hear back from him. Silence only returned. She called out for him once last time, but since the silence continued, she realized she wasn't going to get a response. "Lance, I really hope you're okay," Twilight murmured into the air, turning away from the hallway as if the path had blocked the hallway, wasn't even there away, and she was likely able to get to him. Her magic didn't obey her in this world, She had just had to force the reality that she needed to move on. If helping Lance was out of the question, their next objective was to give Sparkler the proper burial she deserved. Returning to the lobby, she was able to spot the doors looked like the exit. She quickly walked over to the exit, expecting the door to be locked, with her being sent on the same puzzle all over the rest of the hotel, just to get a key to open the door. However, the door simply creaked open, revealing the fog world outside. Ash was still falling from the sky, creating a thin layer on the ground everywhere. It seemed that night had fallen at some point during the town. Night, Twilight murmured, looking up at the dark and foggy sky. It's nighttime. That means Luna raised the moon? Is she aware of what's going on here in Ponyville? She wondered out loud, not sure of what to think of. I wonder if she knows what happened to Princess Celestia. Various thoughts ran through her mind at the moment, none of which seemed to fill a pan in her mind. At some point she figured that Luna would notice what's going on, or what her sister was missing. The unicorn shook her head, took a deep breath, calming herself down again. She had to go through this challenge at a time. She had quickly went back through the lobby, opened for the door to the room she had found herself in. Sparkler's body still laid there in the scenery, waiting to be given the proper send-off as Aurora the purple magic soon wrapped itself around its mare's body, lifting it so gently into the air. With the grace she deserved, Sparkler was carried out into the hotel and into the dark night of Ponyville, the purple Aurora gently giving the magenta mare down, covered in the grass. Twilight concentrated on her magic once more and made a shovel appear from thin air. She quickly struck it down to the earth and then began to dig a hole. Each scoop brought up more dirt from the ground, creating a bigger and bigger hole. Suddenly the shovel struck at something hard, the magic holding the atom together grow unstable and shattering into nothing more. Twilight cursed under her breath and looked into the hole, spying the rock that had the shovel hit on its way down. She levitated the rock out of the body before carefully reforming the shovel with its magic. It wasn't long before Twilight was satisfied with the hole she had dug. She gently lifted Sparkler's body with her magic and laid it to rest at the bottom of the hole. She lifted the pile of dirt she dug up and placed it into the hole, making sure it was flattened before she was satisfied. She then created the final piece for forming a block of wood unto the shape of a tombstone. On its surface she wrote the words, "Here lies Sparkler, a wonderful daughter, a loving sister, and a beautiful mare." She fixed the gray stone edges of her grave, marking as Sparkler's resting place. Once the grave was finished, she sat on the foot of it, watching it quietly. A breeze blew through the silent town, sending a short shiver down her back. The temperature had dropped what seemed as though it wasn't as cold as the snow had littered the ground when she got to sleep for the night. It was still stark of contrast to the muggy air that recited before. She tried to pay it no mind, though, closing its eyes to give Sparkler a moment of peace. "I should probably say something, huh?" the lavender mare asked quietly to the grave. The wind blew the bangs in front of her eyes as she pondered over her words. "I'm so sorry you had to die this way, Sparkler." Her words were soft, almost gentle as the breeze around her. "I wish I could have been there to save you. I don't know how I would have, but I wished." She gritted her teeth, remembering Winter's body, remembering Lance being dragged away, remember Rarity being impaled by the alicorn's sword. "I wish I could have prevented all of this from happening. I wish I could protect every pony. I still remember when your mom decides that she was going to adopt you. You know that?" Twilight chuckled, softly to the grave, moving a hoof to wipe her face gently. "It was kind of a shock to every pony who knew your mom. She already seemed to have a hard time raising her daughter. As it was, she was just suddenly adopted you. She didn't tell any pony why. I couldn't even say that, but I was able to understand the thinking. But the smile on her face showed into the fragile nature of the memories that she could remember, and why you were so precious. I could only see on her face, and then she was with you. She was happy. She loved you, Sparkler, and I know that if she could do anything to have you back, she would do it. It's the kind of mother she was." The mare then lifted her hoof and placed it gently on top of the flat soil before her. "Rest in peace. I am going to put an end to this nightmare, and make sure that your death wasn't in vain." The pony stood, the wind tossing the mane, the flakes of ash falling on her body. She then turned to the road and the hotel was connected to. She looked around, spying the particular set of trees and the plant life that was slowly turning around white around it. The bumps on the road, familiar placing of geography. She knew who she was. She had been down that path many times before. It etched over their mind now. This was the road to Fluttershy's house. Fluttershy, Rainbow Dash, Twilight murmured, looking down at the path into the darkness. She couldn't see her house from there, on a normal cloudy clear day like she likely would have. She had to have been at their wedding just yesterday. She could remember watching the ceremony unfold, or organizing the event of how beautiful Fluttershy had been in her dress, the love she had felt between them, spoken their vows. How could they were going to be leaving their honeymoon for the next day, to rest the excitement of the celebration, to have all their friends seem off? They had to be stuck in this world as well as being tormented by those monsters. Their heads being toyed with like this was some kind of sick game. Watching as all the ponies they cared about got hurt or killed. In the distance, Twilight could hear something echoing through the town. It vibrated low across the air over her coat. She knew the roar of the creature that it came from. It was the dragon that had attacked her in the middle of town. The mare gritted her teeth in frustration as she gazed into the darkness, resolve in the hardening inside and a glare directed at the misery of the town that was in. She was going to protect her friends. She was going to find the princess. She was going to bring the end to this misery. Striking the ground, and she ran as fast as her legs could carry her to the cottage where her two friends were now lived.